Hey guys, welcome back to another video. In this video, I'm going to be talking about rooks and open files. So, open files are like a really basic thing that you gotta learn in chess. If you own an open file, then you're basically gonna like control a good portion of the board. And what an open file is, it's basically like it's the vertical columns of the chessboard. So like it's like the set of squares that is under the same letter. So A1, A2, A3, A4, A5, A6, A7, and A8. They're all on the same file. And that's going to be the A file. So I'm going to talk more about open files later, so let's get started. So in this first position, what I'm trying to show here is basically like the power of like if you have two rooks and a queen on a single file. So one rook on an open file is already really good. And what an open file is, it's basically a file that does not have like one of your own pieces on the path, on the file, other than rooks or queens. So in this scenario, let's take the G file. Now the G file for white would not be an open file because white's king and white's G pawn is on it. So it's not going to be like an open file. It's a file, of course. Anything could be a file, but it won't be an open one. An open one is when your rooks and queen could just like move freely down the board. Now, an open file, it doesn't have anything to do with your enemy's pieces. So let's take the B file. Now, the B file for white, it would be an open file if like it would be a useful open file if white had like a rook or queen on there, supported with another piece, because of course there's a black rook on b7. And the E file in this scenario, black's rook is on the E file, but it's not on an open file because black's knight is on e7, blocking the rook's path, so it's not open to the rook. However, for white, the E file is open, so if one side has an open file, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other side has an open file. And same vice versa. If one side does not have an open file, it does not necessarily mean the other side does not have an open file. So here black, he does not have the E file open, but white, he has the E file open. And so notice how if you triple up your rooks and your queen on the same file, it kind of puts a lot of pressure on the enemy. So in this scenario, you have a white rook on e6 and e3, and then you also have the queen on e2, and they're just like putting a lot of pressure on black. And black, he can barely move his pieces around because he has to deal with that knight on e7. And if he moves the knight away, then the rook behind it will be in danger. So yeah, it's not really good for black. So this is what you want to try to like get in like your chess games. Now here is just the power of doubled rooks. So before we saw like tripling up your queens and your queen and your two rooks. Now here it's just like your two rooks, but your two rooks themselves are really powerful. Notice how in this position, black does not have any access to the D file. Like, black can't place any of his pieces anywhere on the D file. Otherwise it would be pretty bad. He's gonna like lose material. So once you have an open file, you want to try to get one rook on it first, and then you want to try to get 2 rooks. If you could get 2 rooks and a queen on it, that's even better, because then you're gonna have like full control over it. Like basically gonna have control over 1/8 of the board, because there's 8 files. If you could have control over one of those 8 files, you're controlling at least 1/8 of the board. In addition to the amount of space you already have, like that's occupied by your pawns and your other pieces. So yeah, your rooks could be pretty powerful like that. Now, sometimes you might have an open file, but it's not useful. So in this case, black, he has 2 powerful rooks on the A file. Actually, they would have been powerful, except if it wasn't for the 2 bishops and all the white pieces looking at the A file. So when you put your rooks on an open file, you gotta make sure that the file is useful first. Like, you don't want to waste your time, like, putting your rooks on a file and then just realizing, oh no, there's nothing to do here. Like, in this scenario, black, he has his black rooks on A7 and A8, but he can't move his rooks to A4, A3, A2, and A1. And that kind of defeats the purpose of it, because when you double up your rooks on an open file, usually you have a path straight into the enemy territory, straight into there, and like it's really easy to just like win the game because you have control into the heart of your enemy's like army. But now black can't do anything, and especially since it's on the side of the board, it's even more like ineffective. But notice how for black it's still quite powerful, but it's just like a less useful way. So black, he has his rooks on the A file, and notice how white doesn't have access to the A file, but neither does black. So white can't move his pieces on the A file, otherwise they'll get captured by the black pieces. Black, he has some control over the A file, not much, but like it's just more of a trade-off. If black didn't have his rooks on the A file, white would have like he would be able to use the A file, while black would be able to use his rooks. Now here, black is using his rooks to restrain white from using the A file. So it's kind of like trading off your rooks for the A file. So it's really up to you. Now here, sometimes, as you have seen before, like rooks on an open file or a queen on an open file, it's just really powerful. So that stands to be then that you want to try to open files for your rooks and your queen. So you want to do that. So then like sometimes you just gotta like try to open up a file for yourself. So like what you gotta keep in mind is like what files your rooks are on, or what files they could jump on, and which ones are the easiest to open. So, and also make sure like the files, they're not the A file or the H file. They can be the A file and H file, they're still useful, but they tend to be less effective because they're on the side of the board, they're not on the center of the board. Usually the center of the board is like what you want to try to control. So here, white has his queen on D2 and a white rook on D1. And you might notice that there's only one other piece on the D file, the D3 pawn. Now white probably wants to get rid of this pawn, and so that way he could just like open up the file and just like try to give himself an advantage. So what he wants to do is try to break open the D file by moving D3 to D4, and black can't really he can't stop white from opening the file. If he doesn't do anything about the pawn, the D4 pawn, then white just takes D takes E5. Now, if black takes, then the white could just take back with his knight or his bishop, but I'd probably say the knight. Knights in the center are pretty good, and then it also attacks this black knight, and eventually you're gonna get the file open after a bunch of trade-offs, exchanging pieces. Then you're gonna succeed as white. You're gonna succeed to get the file open. Now here, sometimes you need to trade to open the file, but sometimes, what if the file is owned by two people? So white here in this example, he has a rook on E1, but black has a rook on E8. They both have the file. Now, you don't want to step down from the challenge. The two rooks are obviously looking at each other and they're wanting to capture the other rook or something. So you don't want to move your rook away from the E file. Otherwise you lose the file. So here, it's black's turn. He doesn't want to move his rook away to try to avoid an exchange, because then I'll just give white the advantage of the E file, open E file. But you don't wanna shrink away from the file, but eventually pieces will have to be traded. Like here, black might take, and then white might take the rook back, and then black moves his rook here because he doesn't want white to take the file, remember? And it just becomes a trading file, and eventually no one wins the file. So yeah, some files, they might end up like that. Both sides have rooks on the same file, and they just have to trade because they can't back off, otherwise they lose the file. And now this last board example will show how to get the file if both sides have the open file. So as you saw in a previous board, there's no way that one side could have won the file. But in this example, you could win the file. You could make it so then the other person has to step down. And so this is pretty interesting because some people, they just go ahead, rook takes, and they just start trading away and no one wins the file. But if you could spot it, it could be pretty useful to actually win the file. So black, what you want to do is move to rook c3, and this actually has a dual purpose. So this brings the rook down to c3 and kind of threatens the white territory, kind of restrains their activity, it kind of stops them from doing things, and it also allows the rook on a8 to move to c8 on black's next turn. And so let's say white, he moves queen d2, and to try to gain the file. And then now black could play rook on a to c8 to strengthen the rook. And this also threatens pawn b4. And notice that like if black plays pawn b4, then that's even worse for white, because after the rooks are traded, the pawn jumps to c3. You could try to like imagine this in your head. The pawn jumps to c3 and it's a passed pawn, and that's gonna be really bad for white. It's gonna be even worse than the open files, because you have a passed pawn on c3 into your territory, so that's gonna be pretty bad for white. So white doesn't want the pawn going to b4, so you gotta do something. You gotta do something about the rook. Otherwise, black will have a passed pawn. So then he might play rook takes, and black will take back with his queen. And now, because like notice how he didn't want to take with the rook. Otherwise, white will not be forced to take back. White could just like play rook to c1, but now white is forced to take back here. Otherwise, he loses the file, but still he loses the file here, and so black wins the file like this, and he also has to like worry about his bishop on d3. I mean, in later moves, he could like try to move his rook around to try to take back the c file, but it's not gonna really work because then he's gonna lose tempo. So that would be about it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you guys did, leave a like, subscribe, and click that notification bell to see more chess videos.